Today we're going to talk about instructional planning reports. So this is one of the mandatory sessions required at APSIs to help you with instructional planning reports. So if you're brand new to AP, you're not going to really access these for a full year. So you might just pay attention, and then maybe you want to revisit this PowerPoint later, a year from now, next summer, when you finally get your first instructional planning reports. Those of you who have taught AP in the past, you've seen these. This year, however, I don't believe we are getting them. I could be wrong. I'll have to double check my information, but because the AP test is so weird and did not actually cover all of our content, then I don't believe we're going to get instructional planning reports. So you can look at the ones that you have from previous years. So what you get is a report that gives a lot of information, and this is the login for your My AP account, and there'll be a place where you can access your score reports. If you've been teaching for a while, it's over here, and you can click the year for the report you want to see. They don't go back that far. For me, they only go back a few years. It was kind of after they started putting them electronically. Before, we only got paper copies a long time ago when I first started teaching this course. So in the instructional planning report, you get to see how they did, not individually on certain things. The only individual thing you get is the actual score, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. But as a group of students, you'll see where they were weak. So for a lot of years, it was very helpful for me to see that my students were weak, especially on things like farming and soil, because my kids are suburban kids. They don't really have any background in that. So I spent more time and developed some lessons that helped them get these concepts better in their head. And so my scores in this topic improved over time. So I've used the instructional planning report to inform and help me over the years. So this is still showing you how you select your instructional planning report. It has pull-down menus on My AP. And sometimes if there's more than one of you teaching the same course at your school, you'll have to pull down your section as well. For some reason, for some years, late tests came as a different section, but I haven't seen that in the recent years, but it could still be that way. So prior to this year, the schools could have 10 section codes per subject. And so sometimes they did it per period. Mine did not. Mine always just took all of my classes of AP and clumped them together into one section. But in my school, there's 3 AP English language teachers, and so each of those teachers had their own report, their own section. So starting next year, they're revamping the instructional planning reports. It was supposed to be this year, but because the test was so strange with COVID shutdowns, that they postponed these new reports until next year when we have the full exam. And the reports will be more robust and will give you a lot more information. So they're going to show you, and I'm going to show you actually my instructional planning report from last year, and it's going to show you the students and the based in your comparison based on your state and based on the all the students globally who took that same exam. And that's a little bit helpful too. And then it gives you a breakdown of areas where they were weak or strong. You also will be able to filter how each group did. So the more robust instructional planning reports will allow you to filter, and it shows you here per period. And so you can see if certain periods scored higher than other periods, because they will be in AP Classroom by period. At least mine are. I put my students in different sections on AP Classroom. Then the report will see the maximum raw unweighted scores, the group means, the state means, the global means. That's somewhat interesting. A lot of times you have to keep in mind when you see an instructional planning report that your school and students are unique, and the advantages that other kids have, your students may not have. So you have to keep that in mind, and don't take your scores personally. Do the best that you can, and see your weaknesses to try and improve, but it should not make you feel inadequate or bad overall, because there's so many factors outside of our control that lead to AP scores. So they are going to have different versions of the exam. They did this year with the COVID shutdowns, but we've been told that there will be now 3 different versions of the AP test on the test day, and then there'll be more for late testing. So there will be an East Coast version, a West Coast version, and an international version of the AP test. So the reports might look a little bit different depending on what exam that your students did. And so especially the FRQs will be different. And so you'll have to do those filter options. Here, I think that was this, and then filtering here. Sorry, this was the filtering for multiple forms of the exam, and then this is the filtering of how they did. It looks like you can filter for 3, 4s, and 5s. So you're going to have a lot of filtering options. Again, this is to come. This is not the current instructional planning reports. So students that got 5s, you want to see, okay, what did they know compared to the 4s, compared to the 3s, compared to the 2s? That's going to be a very helpful filter for us to determine kids that know more versus kids that know less, and how can we bump these kids up a lot. What I always am really interested in is how can I get those 2s to a 3, because the kids, that's what I have a lot of coming in. I have kids that are kind of at a 2 level. What am I going to do to get them to a 3? So we're going to be able to filter by score, by grade level, by standard group. Grade levels are really interesting too, because you can compare to see if you have a mixed class of like freshmen and seniors, how do the freshmen do? Where are they weak? And they may be weaker in different areas than your seniors. That doesn't mean the freshmen score worse, but they may not be good at certain analytical things that the seniors have had more time developing in high school. And then school and district administrators get more filters to what teachers have available on their end. So we have additional resources here to help teachers prepare for the AP test and for just feedback, especially the personal progress checks. This feedback you get there is going to be helpful for the AP test. So again, coming for next year in 2021, content areas included in the report will reflect the new units and instruction and more detailed score breakdown. So that's going to be really helpful instructional reports. So some other things, we are not going to get them for the 2020 exams, and that's because they were not full exams, and so we can't really get the instructional planning reports. It wouldn't be helpful. Prior years, you have to change the administration year, so if you wanted to access your prior years, you have to make sure you do that. They're not very good on mobile devices, so be sure to use a desktop device for your instructional planning report. And one thing to be aware of is that if you have a small group of AP kids, it's really hard to look at overall statistics. And so I've always taught a very small class for a private school online. It always has 10 or less kids, and it's the data from that is not as informative as the data I get from my public school kids, and I teach about 160 of those a year. And so I get the data, and they don't all take the AP test, so maybe like 140 take the AP test. So for the past 10 years, I've had over 100 kids a year take the AP test, and I really get better data from those 100 than I do from the 10 at the private school. So just be aware that if your group is small, don't read into it, don't overinterpret it, because there could be the small things could show it as big statistically on your report. Viewing students that take the late test, there will not be instructional planning reports for those. And if they took different versions of the exam, they'll be divided up, the instructional planning reports. Let's see. And you will only be able to view an individual section across your sections, only the sections that you taught, so not what the other teachers taught if they taught the same thing. Also, if a student canceled their score, it doesn't appear on the instructional planning report. Okay, so starting with this school year, the school year 2018-2019, teachers at online schools can have your course authorized through the audit, and you can get these reports if you are an online school teacher. This is not the COVID online shutdowns. This is a regular virtual school. All right, here's some more information about downloading the PDF. So when you get the instructional planning reports, you can download it in different forms. Again, you won't access this for over years, so I'm not going into this stuff in much detail. Here's your supporting systems. Again, you're not going to remember this a year from now, so I'm not going to spend much time on these. And on the browser settings. So here's my instructional planning report for the year 2019. So you can just take a look at what we've seen in the past. You're going to see all of this plus more in the future. This is all one section because all of my students were combined into one section, but it looks like from the PowerPoint that's starting in 2021, the College Board says it will be broken down. Also, at this time, as of last year, my students all took the same exam, which will not be the same in the future. So I had 150 students take the exam. California had 27,000. Globally, there was 167,000. Mean scores, the average scores here. So my students were above California and the average and scores. So this, we like to call this passing rate. It's not that's not like the technical term, but this is the 3, 4s, or 5s. And then the distribution. So my students did well last year. Again, I've been teaching it for 15 years and I'm in a high school, so a high achieving school. So do not look at mine as what you should have in the future. Remember, our global pass rate was less than 50%. So your students might be different kinds of students that come in than my students, and they have different struggles and different abilities. I still have my struggling students in here. I don't have a super high pass rate. I don't ever hit the 90s. I hardly ever hit the 80s. And so I really, really work on how can I help these 1s and 2s to pass. So you can see my score breakdown. Most of my kids got a 4. And then the number of students that got each score. So this is the interesting part. It shows this is the old outline. So this was the last year of the old test, and there were 7 units in the old test. So it showed how many questions out of 100 on the old test there were, the average for my kids, the state average, the global average. So all of these are above state and global. They're not always, so some years I do have some sections that are a little bit lower. But here I want to see, well, which ones did they not quite do as well on? And I'm trying to look. Some years, like Living World, it's kind of interesting, but Living World is the ecology stuff. And my students, it's interesting because that's the stuff we do at the beginning of the year, and so they forget it often. So my students often score a little bit lower on that. And then these are the 4 FRQs that my students took that year, and all of them took the same ones. And so there's my group average, the state average, the global average. So this was a particularly good year for my students. Again, I didn't have 100% pass rate, and I never have. Except one year at the private school, I had 5 students and all 5 passed. But other than that, once you're getting above 100 students, the likelihood of getting super high pass rates is very low. And that's good. That's not a bad thing. That just means that you're allowing a lot of kids to have the opportunity to take AP. All right, so that's instructional planning reports.